morning, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, everyone who is following this online, I understand there are many people online. It's really a pleasure to be here today, and thank you very much for having me. I told already some of you, I did the classical school in the Netherlands, and you also learn Old Greek and Latin, but I never made it to Athens until yesterday, and I saw the Acropolis. So I think that in itself is already very exciting. But even more important, also in my role as the chairperson of EIOPA, I think it is to discuss pensions today here with you. And I'm happy to hear that you already had a very good discussion yesterday. Being here in Greece really reminds me, not just of my education, but also just by looking outside, of the great history that started here. A history not just of Greece, but of Europe. And so this is I think a very important part of the civilization of Europe where we are here today. And it also brings to mind, of course, the stories about the great gods, including like Athena, the god. But it brings to mind mythology and all kinds of mystery that surrounds mythology. And I think that's also the beauty of myths, isn't it? I mean, from generation to generation, we tell the stories and they come embedded in society. And yes, some are true and some are not. And then moving to pensions, I think there's a lot of myths concerning pensions. Stories that are told about pensions, often contradictory, but gradually becoming part of our stories as if they were facts. And how many times do we not hear people say that you don't need to save for later because, you know, government will take care of you. And you also hear people say you should not bother to save with government because it might not be anything left by the time you retire. These things are easily said, but they're not really true, are they? But that is it. It's complicated to talk about pensions, and so on top of all these myths, we have many people who are so daunted by the complexity of pensions and by looking so far away to retirement when they're young that they find it easier just to move on with life and deal with other things, but stay away from the complex context of pensions. And in a way, this might even be true for some governments. Because overhauling a pension system, having a pension discussion is not easy. It's a monumental task, to be frank, or being in Greece, it requires Olympian effort. So today what I want to do is, in my remarks, I want to do a little bit of demystification of all these stories that are out there. And I want to just talk about some facts in pensions, some facts and numbers that we see in retirement. I want to shed some light on the difficulties of boosting the establishment of workplace pensions, of EIOPs, and the challenge of engaging people to save for later and enrolling them into schemes. Because the truth is, and it's a serious truth, we need to pay attention to pensions, even though it is an Olympian task, it's difficult, it's complex. We need to pay attention to pensions. It's an important topic, rightly highlighted today in this conference. And it is good we are asking the difficult questions today. And we should not limit those questions to one pillar, not one, not two, not three. We need to talk about the entire pension landscape, and I will. So let me start with a short overview of where we are today. Now, first of all, it's very true that the pension landscape in Europe is fragmented. For very good reasons. From history, from culture, we build different systems and different schemes across member states that work in those member states or have issues in those member states. And that's the interesting part. When it comes to the issues, when it comes to the challenges, more or less the member states face the same. Increasing life expectancy and an aging population, and a difficulty to motivate people to save for later. And according to the World Economic Forum, looking at global population, aging really becomes an issue. For the first time in human history, people aged over 65 currently outnumber the children who are 5 years old or younger. Now in Europe, that balance is even worse. And the number of people over 65, when you're over 65, you are going into the category old in these data. But that number is going to rise dramatically in Europe. So today, on average in Europe, we have for every retired person, we have 3 persons at a working age. In about 50 years, that number will go down to 1.5. So 1.5 person at a working age for each person retired. And this shrinking number of people that is working will increase pressure on pension systems across Europe, with fewer people saving into the state pension system. This is a reality we need to deal with somehow. It's one of the reasons why adequacy and sustainability of pension schemes are very high on the agenda of every policymaker, I would say, in that area in Europe. For the major challenge will be to provide citizens with adequate retirement income and at the same time ensure that public finances remain sustainable. This is key to prevent poverty at old age, and it is urgent. On average, in the EU, almost 1 in 5 risks currently poverty at old age, 1 in 5 persons. Now, if you add to that gender, it's getting worse for women, for the reality is that a woman's pension is about 30%, a third less than what men will receive, but also women have 35% more risk to end up in poverty than men when retiring. But all in all, even if you keep it to an overall number, 1 in 5, I would say, is too much. So here is a need to address the adequacy and sustainability of pensions, and we are seeing measures being put in place. For example, some countries are increasing retirement age. Not an easy discussion. We recently saw in one member state it's difficult, but they are discussing it, they're working on it. There are also questions on how to encourage those who are at a working age, at an age that they can work, to actually participate in the workspace. And of course, there are all the initiatives to reform the public pension schemes. And these changes, of course, relates to the first pillar, the state pensions, or sometimes pay-as-you-go systems. But I do think that we should not stop there when it comes to thinking about how we can close the gap. And here I come back to mythology, and I'm very happy I can do that today here in Athens, because this is the example I use in any member state I go to discuss pensions. And it's the riddle that was presented by the Sphinx to Oedipus. And the Sphinx asked Oedipus, what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 3 in the evening? And the Sphinx was referring to these different stages of human life. We crawl as a baby, we walk firmly on our 2 legs as adults, but when we are old, we need an extra stick to walk on. We need 3 legs. And when you translate that to pensions, we need 3 pillars. So let's discuss the other pillars, for I already discussed the first. Let me say something about developments that we at the EU level are seeing in the second pillar, which are also known as occupational pensions or workplace pensions. Now, the third thing to mention here, of course, is that we see overall a shift from defined benefit to defined contribution. Across the board in Europe, this is happening right now and has been happening because of low yields. It's a growing change. It's a growing change in Europe, and it has an impact on what pensions mean for people. Gone are the days when you would spend your whole working life with one company. I think that is in general a trend that is fading out. But then once you would retire safely with that company, knowing you would continue to receive a stable income, mostly a percentage of your final salary, and that you would have that for the rest of your life. Those days were, but they're not here anymore. Today's reality is that the risk and responsibility has been shifted to employees during the time that they save for later, but also when they go into retirement, because now they have to contend also with managing lump sums or pots rather than getting a steady income. So again, here is a role for industry to play. And to go back to the theme of this conference, boosting second pillar growth, the question is, how do we empower people to make the right decisions when they deal with workplace pensions? I said it before, for many people, the whole idea of pensions is very complex. So how do we get them involved? Now, I think one of the first things we need to do is we need to make it more simple. And we need to provide better, simple information. And here I'm a strong believer that a pension tracking system can help. And what do I mean with a pension tracking system? Currently 7 countries in the EU have this. It's a system, it's online, and as a citizen you can go online, you can log in, and then you get an overview of what you have saved for later in all 3 pillars. We have 4 countries currently considering to make it. That makes then together with the 7-11, but we still miss some looking into this. Now in many countries that means people cannot get this overview. They cannot get in one place a simple overview of where they are with saving for later. Building a tracking system could help this, help people understand where they are and also make decisions on what to do when they see where they are. EIOPA has looked into how to build this, and frankly we have leaned very strongly here on industry. Pension tracking systems are not built by the supervisor, they're built by industry, often sometimes together with public authorities, but you need expertise from industry, you need a lot of data. But we drafted an advice and recommendations on how you can do it, how you can design it, what the content should be, and what is a roadmap to get there. And it's important that you remember that you cannot build this over time, not overnight. You need to really use resources, you need to take time, but it would be worth the effort because once you have it, you have a place where you have an overview. Now with that overview, it doesn't necessarily mean that people look at it and decide to join more pension schemes. So we also need to think about different ways to make people actually actively participate in a workplace pension. And here we see an introduction in Europe of a mandatory enrollment. Now naturally we have some EU countries that have a whole system with social partners in place that have an obligatory mandatory second pillar. But this is a result of decades of talking to each other, so it's not easy. But we see now other member states who do it like in a bit easier way, introducing mandatory enrollment with an opt-out option for those who don't want to stay in. And it works because we see that people tend to stay in and not opt out and automatically start saving additionally next to Pillar 1 in Pillar 2 for later. And Italy and the United Kingdom are currently putting this in place and it's introduced by their governments. Now what we see here is that it works and that it results in higher participation in a second pillar. So then you already have 2 feet to stand on. Again, like tracking systems, you can't put this in place very quickly. You need to talk to stakeholders. It's not always an easy discussion, but it's a talk you need to have. And you need to bring on boards and schemes that are designed properly. You need to do pilots, and only then, once you've all that, you can actually roll it out. And finally, you need to consider proportionality. These things cannot just be rolled out, but you need to consider possibilities for small businesses to join forces. And finally, pension funds, IOPs, need to be run well, and this is where supervisors do come in. IOP 2 regulation. While it's a minimum harmonization framework, I think it's a very good standard for good governance. Now, talking about that role we have at EIOPA, our policy making role, saying a few words on IOP 2 here. It's in our best interest to make sure that this framework remains fit for purpose. It does not need a complete overhaul. We just have it in place. In some countries, actually, we have it really recently just in place. But it is something that we need to look at to make sure it is fit for purpose. And in particular, we look at how cross-border is working, how information to members can be improved, like the pension benefit statement. And we're also paying, of course, a close close attention to defined benefit and defined contribution, particularly to sustainability and to diversity. But doing that is because this part of the 3 legs, the 3rd pillar, is an important part of making sure we have a good retirement. So workplace pensions are a valuable option and need to be regulated properly, and that is what we work for. Now that leaves me with the 3rd pillar. Private pensions coming in, and that's more or less all the other ways, also through insurance, by the way, which is also within the mandate of EIOPA, that individuals can save for later. Let me say a few words on private pensions. They are, again, a valuable way to save, and again, it should be easy to use. it should be understandable, it should be transparent, and it should offer value for money. And this is what we look at EIOPA. We currently pay more and more attention on value for money, meaning that we make sure that the products suit to the needs of the consumer that buys it, that products are sold to a target market that actually can benefit from that product, and that the costs that are charged for the product are in a good balance with the costs actually made by the intermediary or the insurer that sold the product. Because after all, affordable and accessible saving schemes are important for people who are not always saving in other pillars. And particularly, we see a growing group of people who is self-employed. We see a growing group of people who move across borders in the EU, which is great. I think this is why we wanted the internal market. We see gig workers and we see young people having to change jobs a lot because of economic conditions. And for these people, maybe a pillar 2 does not always work, or maybe it partly works. Yeah? I think it's one of the legs they stand on. But here, having a third leg is important. And that is also why EIOPA developed the PEP, the Pan-European Pension Product. I think we had the benefit as supervisors of having a lot to say of what a good product would be. So here we had to put it in practice. So we tried to make a very low-cost, transparent, digital-first product that when it is bought by a consumer, that consumer can continue to pay into that product regardless on job changes or even country changes. That's the idea of the product. You just pay into that product and you save in the third pillar for later. The product has been launched. It's not taking off very fast. That first of all has to do with that it has to come into being. Second, it has to do, of course, with the fact that we are currently in a cost of living crisis. And I'll say a little bit about that later, but I think in general, I fully appreciate that people are currently not in a position to start buying additional products when they are already struggling to deal with the prices of groceries as it is. But in the end, I think it's a good way of considering that this product in the future can have a role, again, as an addition to a range of products, in this case, in the third pillar, to make sure that in the end we have a very good fundament to go into pensions. Now let me turn to the situation in Greece. Because just as I was talking about EU and seeing steps, of course, also in Greece, there are active steps being taken to deal with the pension gaps. And for example, during the last year, the government introduced TECA in the first pillar, a public pre-funded scheme like in Denmark and Sweden that can help young people to start for their pension savings. It's a good step in pillar 1, but I would say let's not stop there. Let's also look at workplace pensions and make progress there. Participation there remains voluntary. And there are still a lot of people also over 30 in Greece, and maybe also people under 30 who want to save additionally. So could you also here consider learning from other member states the step towards mandatory enrollment? And I think the benefit is here that yes, there are challenges, but the challenges are not unsurmountable. And moreover, because we already see so many developments in other countries, the benefit could be here to just monitor what is happening elsewhere, learn from that, and then skip some of the first steps and move ahead in Greece. And here EIOPA can help. We are actively gathering practices. We're sharing those practices for member states who are looking into ways to boost all three pillars to learn from each other. There are also some key steps and milestones to consider in moving EIOPS along. For example, a first step could be already now to look at the legal framework, and I think that is very much involving the political level. So do you have a legal framework in place to make steps towards mandatory enrollment? And if you have, can you consult? Can you discuss with stakeholders? And once you do that, again, can you do pilots? Can you do evaluations? Can you learn from that? And all this should happen before a national rollout. And I've said this all in a few sentences, but I'm making it maybe even sound easy, but I know it's not easy. It's a difficult discussion. It's, again, an Olympian task. But And I would say in reality it would take 10 years to achieve at least if you want to do it properly, had to get it all organized. But some steps can be taken also sooner, and I think it's a key part of making sure that this outlook for all people to not live in poverty needs steps going forward to enhance all three pillars. Because the truth is, moving back to Europe, that people are not saving enough for retirement, as I said, not only in Greece, but in Europe. And we recently surveyed the people, and we published the answers in our consumer protection report that is online. We published it end of January. The answers were very sobering, to be frank. Of those we surveyed, only 18%, this is at the EU level, only 18% pays into a workplace pension, and only 20% has a personal pension. And as a result, I would say, only 45% of people believe that they will have enough money to live comfortable in retirement. And here the number for Greece is 30%. It's a bit below 30% actually. Now, on top of this, many people are now experiencing a cost of living crisis. They have less disposable income and less money to go to savings, and maybe some even have reduced the savings because of this. And this is why we need to pay attention to pensions, because even if people can't save today, making the infrastructure, getting the regulatory and the organization in place to facilitate savings when things are better and there is more room to save is important. We need to boost not just the second pillar, we need to make sure that we boost all three pillars together to make sure everyone has a pension. Now let me conclude by saying that I think all of us are in no doubt that reforming and strengthening pension regimes is needed, and that's why we see so much activity. I think we also all agree that it is not an easy discussion, and it really matters, and we see that too. But it's good we have the discussion. We need to talk about this, because it's not only needed, it's urgently needed. And so we all need to embark on this journey, but here I can say you don't have to start from scratch. Already things are in place, also in Greece, and already there is lots that you can learn from other member states, and EIOPA is happy to help. And then what can I say? In this country, with a history of gods and goddesses, or as my younger son told me, you're going to the country of the Superman, Mom. I'm sure that you are up to the task. And I also am sure that the effort will be worthwhile, because in the long run, it will improve the lives of many people. And I think, in general, that is a goal that we all share when we are in pensions or in insurance, be it industry or supervisor. So let's work on that. Let's have the discussions. Let's try to reach decisions. Let's involve all stakeholders. And let's make sure people can live comfortable in retirement. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much.